A lioness brought her sick white cub to a man's door for help. What happened next was a miracle. Have you ever witnessed a moment when the wild breaks through the everyday and changes everything in a single heartbeat? It was just past dusk, the sky a fading wash of soft purples and blues, when a sudden quiet fell over the small neighborhood. The usual calm was disrupted by a presence that no one expected, a fragile white cub, pale as moonlight, trembling on the edge of a man's porch. Its breath was shallow, its eyes barely open, filled with confusion more than fear. Alongside it stood a lioness, her amber eyes locked on the house, muscles taut with a desperate hope rarely seen in such fierce creatures. For the neighbors who watched from behind curtains and fences, shock rooted their feet. This was no ordinary visitor. The cub, unlike the tawny, golden young of its kind, was marked by a rare and challenging condition, a sickness that made it vulnerable in a world designed for strength. It was a secret of nature's design, one that left the cub isolated and abandoned, unable to keep pace with its pride, left to face the wild alone. The man who opened his door to see this unexpected visitor was no stranger to the extraordinary. Living apart yet close to nature's edge, he had earned a quiet reputation for kindness, but even he had never seen anything quite like this. The lioness didn't roar or threaten. She simply stood there, her gaze pleading, as if asking for a mercy that transcended species and fear. Neighbors whispered in the shadows. Why would such a rare and fragile creature seek help here? What had driven this wild mother to leave the safety of her hidden world for a simple human home? The injustice was clear. This cub's rare condition made it vulnerable, and the wild had turned its back on it. Yet here it was, a living promise of hope and resilience, standing at the threshold of a man's kindness. As the cool night air thickened with tension and wonder, the man stepped forward, unsure of what saving this fragile life might demand. The storm of doubt was only beginning. What would happen next could change everything for all of them. But before the man could make sense of the moment, a different kind of tension crept closer, setting the stage for a clash that neither the man nor the neighborhood had anticipated. The sharp crunch of dry leaves under heavy boots cut through the still night air as the hunter appeared at the edge of the porch's faint light. His figure was solid, rigid, a man shaped by years of cold mornings and harsh wilderness. His eyes, dark and hard, scanned the small white cub and the lioness standing protectively beside it. The silent gaze held a mix of suspicion and something heavier, buried pain. Known in the town as a man unyielding when it came to wildlife, the hunter rarely spoke without a bluntness that raised eyebrows. Many thought he took pleasure in the harshness he showed animals. Others whispered that his heart was closed to forgiveness. But beneath that steely surface lay a secret no one dared to ask about. Years ago, in the same wild where the cub's mother now roamed, he had lost his young daughter to an accident. The wilderness that cradled him with beauty had cruelly torn a part of his soul. Since that loss, the hunter carried a quiet storm inside. His resentment toward the predators of the forest grew strong. To him, they were symbols of danger, reminders of what he had lost. Every coyote's howl, every rustle in the woods, brought back the raw ache of that night. His efforts focused not only on surviving, but also on controlling the untamed animals he blamed for his pain. Standing before the pale cub and the fierce lioness, the hunter found his old wounds stirred awake. He didn't shout, but his voice was low, hard. You shouldn't be helping this one. It's a risk, to you and to everyone else. His words were edged with sorrow masked as caution, a warning wrapped in years of heartbreak. The man who had opened his door looked at the hunter and then at the fragile cub. He felt the weight of something larger than the visible suffering, a shadow behind the man's stern gaze. But could that quiet pain soften a heart so fixed on fear? No one yet knew that this meeting at the doorstep would be the first step toward uncovering a hidden grief, one that held the key to change. The man who had opened his door to the fragile white cub was known in the small town as a quiet guardian of the wild. He lived alone at the edge of the forest, a place where few dared to venture unless they had a good reason. People often saw him moving gently through the trees, carrying injured animals or setting up small shelters to protect nests and dens. His reputation was one of kindness, but also of solitude. No one quite understood why he chose to live apart from others, or why he fought so fiercely for creatures some called dangerous. That night, as the hunter confronted him with suspicion and warning, the man looked down at the cub cradled in his arms. The little creature was trembling, its breath irregular, fragile like glass. The cub's condition was rare. Something in its fur marked it different, almost otherworldly, and that alone raised questions nobody could answer. How had it survived alone? Why had its mother, a lioness so loyal and fierce, brought it here to this doorstep? The man's heart twisted with worry. He had saved many animals before, but this small life felt heavier to protect. Was it his place? Could he truly make a difference? Despite the fear wrapped tightly around him, the man's hands stayed gentle. He had seen neglect and cruelty before. He knew loneliness, both in animals and in people. Yet something about this cub stirred a deeper uncertainty. If he cared for it, would the town believe him? Would the hunter's accusations turn the community against him? Could a damaged and vulnerable being bring more harm than good? The man did not have answers. What he held was a fragile hope, a chance that kindness might reach even the hardest hearts, that healing was possible beneath the weight of distrust. But the road ahead was unclear. Would the town's silent judgment build walls around him, or would they soon see that saving a single life could change many? The night grew colder, shadows closing in on the porch. The man whispered softly to the cub, eyes searching for signs of strength in its pale gaze. Somewhere beyond the trees, the hunter watched, full of his own doubts and pain. The silence between them held a question neither dared say aloud. Could compassion really overcome years of fear? The hunter's voice cut through the quiet night, sharp and cold as the wind rustling the leaves. He stood by the gate, eyes narrowed, scanning the fragile form nestled in the man's arms. "What do you think you're doing, bringing that cub here?" he demanded, his tone heavy with accusation. "You're feeding their kind. You're inviting trouble, putting people at risk." The man looked up, his gaze steady but calm. He could see the tension etched on the hunter's face, the deep lines carved by years of bitterness and fear. "It's just a cub," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "It's sick, barely alive. It needs help, not suspicion." But the hunter wasn't convinced. "You don't understand," he said bitterly, stepping closer. "These animals aren't just creatures to be rescued. They are wild, dangerous. You think you're saving something, but you're only encouraging them to come closer, to us. And one day, that closeness will cost someone dearly." The man's hands tightened gently around the cub, feeling its fragile pulse beneath his fingertips. "I've seen the fear they bring," he answered quietly, "but I've also seen what happens when we turn away. When we let fear decide instead of compassion, we lose more than just lives. We lose ourselves." The hunter's jaw clenched, his eyes flickering with a storm barely contained. "You don't know what it's like," he muttered, pain shadowing his words. "I've seen things, lost things. I don't want others to go through that." For a moment silence hung between them, thick and heavy. The man's heart ached with an unspoken understanding. This was more than about the cub or the fear of danger. It was about wounds that ran deep, hidden beneath the hunter's harsh words. Still, the hunter's voice broke the quiet again, strained but unwavering. "If something goes wrong, if that cub brings harm, you'll be responsible." The man met his gaze, steady and clear. "I'm responsible for this life, and I believe that's worth the risk." As the night wrapped its cold arms around them, two very different hearts faced one another, one locked in fear, the other open with hope. The clash of beliefs had begun, but neither yet knew the path it would lead them down. The man sat quietly on the porch, the cub resting softly beside him, its breath shallow but steady. He watched the hunter walk away, shoulders rigid, the weight of his words lingering in the heavy air. Yet, beneath the hunter's harshness and warnings, something else had surfaced, something fragile and raw. It pulled at the man's mind, sparking questions that refused to settle. Later that evening, the man found himself wandering the wooded trail near the hunter's cabin, a place he had never dared to enter before. He moved slowly, his senses alert to every sound and shadow. The trees whispered secrets, and deep inside, he felt that the hunter's bitterness was rooted not only in fear, but in something far more personal. He remembered the flicker of pain behind the hunter's steady gaze. There had been a story there, a wound invisible yet powerful enough to shape a man's entire way of being. Why had the hunter's voice trembled for a moment? Why did he warn so fiercely? The man's heart pressed him onward, driven by a quiet need to understand. By the fading light, he glimpsed the silhouette of an old weathered porch chair, worn and empty, beside the hunter's home. Nearby, a small forgotten photograph lay on the ground, edges curled and dirt-streaked, a faint image of a young girl laughing beside an adult, whose face bore a trace of sadness. The man picked it up gently, feeling a pang of empathy. Could this be the secret burden the hunter carried, a loss that tightened his throat and hardened his spirit? Could the hunter's hatred of the wild be a mask for grief so profound he could not speak it aloud? Doubts shadowed the man's thoughts. What if saving the cub wasn't just about mercy toward a helpless creature, but a chance to heal an old wound no one dared to touch? Would the hunter even allow such healing? Could he let go of the fear and anger protecting him for so long? The night deepened, and with it, the man's resolve grew. Behind every stern word and cold glance, he sensed a fragile humanity waiting to be reached. The path ahead was uncertain, tangled with grief and old pain. But he knew one thing clearly. Understanding the hunter's hidden sorrow might be the first step toward transforming their clash into something new, something hopeful. The man returned home with the photograph tucked safely in his pocket. The cub shifted beside him, its soft breathing a steady reminder of the fragile life now resting in his care. He set the photo gently on the kitchen table, staring at the faded image, while dark thoughts swirled in his mind. The hunter's sadness was real. The bitterness, a shield built over years of loss and fear. Still, the cub lay vulnerable and alone. The man could not turn away. Every instinct screamed at him to help, not just the animal, but perhaps the man who had burdened himself with so much pain. That night he prepared a small space near the fireplace. The cub's frail body needed warmth, care, and quiet rest. The man worked with tenderness unusual in the harshness of the world outside. Morning light slipped through narrow windows, painting the room with cautious hope. Word was already spreading in the town that the man was nursing the rare white cub. Some whispered warnings, echoing the hunter's concerns, but most knew the man's heart. He was chosen for moments like this, a healer of wounds both seen and invisible. Despite the hunter's harsh talk, the man decided the cub's chance at survival was worth the risk. He believed deeply that compassion could mend more than broken bones. It might also reach the heart hardened by grief, a heart afraid to hope again. Days passed in quiet routine, the cub gaining tiny strength with each careful feeding. The man thought often of the hunter, wondering if their shared care for the vulnerable might one day open a door between them. If the cub lived, it was not just a creature saved. It might become the first fragile thread in a new kind of trust. That evening, when the hunter came again, the man met his cold gaze with quiet resolve. "I will care for the cub," he said simply. "Not because I fear the wild, but because I believe healing starts where compassion does." The hunter said nothing. For once, his words were swallowed by silence, heavy with more than warning. The man knew the real battle lay not in agreeing, but in understanding. And he was ready to fight that battle, not with anger or fear, but with steady kindness, hope, and a belief that sometimes saving one life is a seed for saving many more. The air grew thick with smoke as the wildfire edged closer to the small town. Flames licked the horizon, the sky turning an ominous shade of grey. The man, standing at the edge of his property, felt a pulse of alarm tighten in his chest. The cub, fragile yet growing stronger, needed protection more than ever. But the fire was relentless, and it threatened everything. That afternoon, the hunter arrived without his usual cold distance. His eyes scanned the sky, tight with concern. "It won't be safe for long," he said, almost reluctantly. "We have to move the cub, and fast." For a moment the man hesitated. The cub was weak, still learning to trust the warmth of a human hand. Moving it now was risky, but staying meant certain danger. The hunter's presence changed something between them. There was no room for old grudges here. Survival would demand cooperation. Together they gathered supplies, blankets, food, water. The cub stirred quietly, sensing the tension but trusting the man's steady touch. The man carried a small woven basket lined with soft cloth. The cub rested carefully inside, eyes fluttering shut as they prepared to leave. Smoke thickened, the scent of burning wood sharp and bitter. They moved swiftly through the narrowing paths, the fire's roar growing behind them. The hunter led, his knowledge of the wild guiding each cautious step away from danger. The man followed, clutching the basket close, feeling the frail heartbeat beneath his fingers. At a clearing near a river they paused. The water's calm surface reflected the fiery sky, a stark contrast to the chaos creeping closer. Together they built a temporary shelter, using fallen branches and damp leaves. The cub was placed safely inside, protected from ash and heat. As the fire crept along the forest's edge, the man and the hunter stood side by side, watching and waiting. The old bitterness in the hunter's eyes softened, replaced by a quiet resolve. They shared a silent understanding. This moment was more than survival. It was a chance to protect life, fragile and fierce, against a dark force. The flames slowed, but did not vanish. The night brought a cool wind, carrying hope and relief. Yet neither man moved from the clearing. They were bound now, guardians of the cub and witnesses to a fragile peace born from shared purpose. In the back of his mind, the man wondered, could this fire also burn away old fears? Could the cub's fragile life spark a true beginning for them both? The answer would come with dawn. The night was quiet, fragile like glass, as the man and the hunter sat near the small fire by the clearing. The cub lay curled in the basket, breathing softly, its tiny chest rising and falling with each uncertain beat of life. The fire had calmed somewhat, but unease clung heavily to the air. The hunter's eyes, usually sharp and cold, flickered with something different now, something raw and conflicted. His hands trembled ever so slightly when he reached for a water bottle. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this," he muttered, almost to himself. The man noticed, but he didn't speak. Sometimes silence holds more truth than words. What haunted the hunter most? Was it the pain he had shared before, or was there a deeper wound, still fresh and raw beneath his gruff exterior? The man wondered if helping the cub had cracked something fragile inside the hunter, exposing fears he tried so hard to keep hidden. "Do you really believe this little one can survive?" the hunter asked suddenly, voice low and uncertain. Doubt hung heavy between them, twisting in the cold night air. The man wanted to say yes with every fiber of his being, but the truth fluttered somewhere between hope and fear. Could saving the cub change more than just a life? Could it soften walls built over years of bitterness? The hunter's questions weren't just about the cub's survival. They felt like questions about himself, about whether healing was possible for someone deeply broken. For the first time, the hunter admitted, "I don't know if I want to believe that." The words fell like fragile glass breaking. An opening, a crack in armor long worn. The man reached out, placing a steady hand on the hunter's arm. No words, no promises, just presence. They sat there in a quiet truce, worlds apart, but connected by a fragile hope that something better might come from this shared night. In that stillness, the man wondered, could the cub's life be a bridge, not just between them, but toward forgiveness? Could the hunter find redemption, not in hunting, but in saving? Dawn was still hours away, but the seed of change had been planted, delicate, uncertain, yet fiercely alive. When the firelight flickered low, the man and the hunter sat closer, their shared focus on the small white cub resting in the basket between them. The cub's breathing grew steadier, a soft rhythm that carried the weight of promise. The wildfire had passed, leaving behind smoldering earth and clear skies, a borrowed chance at survival. But something more powerful wove itself into the night, the fragile bond between two souls who had once been worlds apart. Days had passed since the man first found the cub, and with every careful touch, every quiet moment of care, the hunter's walls began to crumble. He no longer saw the cub as just a wild creature to be feared or controlled. Instead, he saw hope, the possibility of a new path. It was a strange feeling for him, unfamiliar and unsettling, yet it was real. The man broke the silence gently. "You've done so much already. You saved it too in your way. It's not just mine to care for." The hunter looked down, eyes softened, searching the man's face. "I never thought I'd feel this way about any of them, not after what happened." His voice cracked with honesty, a confession long withheld. "Watching it grow, seeing it struggle but keep going, it's changed something inside me." The man nodded, understanding more than words could say. The cub mirrored their fragile alliance, small and vulnerable, yet fiercely alive. It was a symbol of the healing that neither man dared to expect. Together, they began to build something new. They talked about protecting the fragile lives around them, wild and human alike. The town noticed the change, too. The man's quiet determination blended with the hunter's newfound resolve. Little by little, fences fell, and the community's old fears gave way to cautious hope. The cub, once abandoned and vulnerable, now thrived, not just as an animal saved, but as the heart of a story that mended broken spirits. Each day, it reminded them all that compassion was a power capable of bridging divides and restoring trust. The man and the hunter, once strangers with clashing beliefs, had found common ground in their shared mission. Side by side, they faced the future, a future shaped by kindness, understanding, and the quiet courage to forgive. As the seasons turned, the white cub, once fragile and abandoned, grew stronger and began to explore the world around it. Its snowy fur became a symbol not only of rarity, but of survival, a testament to the power of compassion and second chances. The man watched with quiet pride, seeing in the cub's bright eyes the reflection of hope rekindled in the hearts of many, including the hunter, whose transformation was perhaps the most profound. The hunter, once hardened by loss and bitterness, found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with the man, not as an adversary, but as a guardian of life. Together, they became the protectors of their community's delicate balance, showing that understanding could replace fear and empathy could dissolve the deepest wounds. Their shared mission created ripples. Neighbors began to speak differently about the wild. Children listened with curiosity instead of caution, and a new respect blossomed for all creatures who called the land home. At town meetings, where anger and suspicion once ruled, soft voices spoke of conservation, coexistence, and healing. The old fences, both physical and emotional, began to fall as the man and the hunter taught by example. They reminded everyone that behind every creature, every fear, was a story waiting to be heard, a story that could change hearts and rewrite futures. In the end, the cub's recovery was more than a physical miracle. It was a symbol of renewal for an entire community. The man and the hunter had bridged a gulf, carved by grief and mistrust, proving that kindness, no matter how small, can grow into something enduring and powerful. Their journey taught a simple truth. When we choose compassion over judgment, we open the door to healing and hope. If this story touched you in any way, share in the comments which part resonated most with you. What lesson do you think shines brightest here? Subscribe to the channel. Your presence makes every story worthwhile. The next tale might just move you even more.